Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this channel. Christina Previtt here, and today I want to be talking about a study that was published in 2024 in the International Urogynecology Journal from the lab up in Ottawa with Marie-Ève Berube and Linda McLean that is looking at structural changes to the pelvic floor before and after a run for those with running induced stress incontinence and those without. If you took a look at my Instagram or my Substack, you know that I was opening up this conversation about how participation in sport, particularly high intensity, high impact sport, may predispose some people to pelvic floor dysfunction or a higher risk of pelvic floor dysfunction as they age. And how do we embrace these conversations, talk about this multifactorial nature, refer to pelvic PT and create policies in sport that respect and consider pelvic health, not only in athletic performance, but also in the aging world of females, whether they're in athletics long-term or not. And so one of the reasons that has kind of started to generate this hypothesis for me is that what we know is that when you are doing high intensity exercise, your pelvic floor changes from pre to post exercise with fatigue and impact. Now, this study is looking at acute changes, not long-term changes over time, which would be an interesting follow-up study to this. But I want to talk about this and really think about what this means. So, the acute effects of running on pelvic floor morphology and function. And if you look here, what I really liked about this study was that it took an equal number of people with and without running incontinence and tried to match this for age and parity. So the parity referring to the number of births, so that they tried to control for confounding variables, which especially birth is one of them, as much as they could. What they did is they took individuals, did a dynamometry of pelvic floor strength, did ultrasound of where kind of structures of the pelvic floor, the levator plate, the bladder neck, and urethral positions were, and the diameter and size of the opening of the vagina, and compared that pre to post run and looked at differences between those with and without incontinence. So here is essentially what they found. This is demographic information to show that they were able to match, and the things that were different was having stress incontinence in some of their symptom burden on the ISIC, which is the International Continence Information Questionnaire. I always get it wrong, but a pelvic floor self-report measure. Horrible when we only call it from the acronyms and then we can't figure out what's going on after that. And then here is some of their findings. If I can get this to shift. Here we go. So one of the things that they noticed was that the strength in both the continent and incontinent group of the pelvic floor muscles did not change pre to post run. So it didn't seem to have, particularly for those with stress urinary incontinence, one of the hypotheses is that one group is more fatigable than the other. And so if you have incontinence, your pelvic floor endurance is low, and then you can't maintain urethral closure. That is not what they found here, right? Dyno before and after, these were not different, okay? What they did find was that static structures changed. So the area, full area, and AP diameter, so top to bottom diameter of the vaginal opening was higher in both groups. Okay, so in both groups, there is some difference within group difference here, and there was no between group difference. So they were able to do acute or before versus after, there was a difference, but stress UI runners versus no UI runners, there was no difference. The other thing was a change in the resting position of the bladder neck and levator plate. So there was some lowering of the bladder neck pre to post run in both groups. And so what they were finding and what was really interesting about this was that there didn't seem to be pelvic floor function differences between the running UI group and those without running UI. What this is starting to look at is potentially, right, how resting position earlier, like before starting the run, knowing that there is going to be a change in lowering of things like bladder neck, could predispose some women to be more likely to have running induced stress urinary incontinence that has nothing to do with the strength and function of the pelvic floor. It has everything to do with static anatomy. This gets into this conversation of, should we be thinking about using pessary supports for our runners on top of or in conjunction with pessary management? And what are some of the long-term kind of consequences of running? Not the don't run, but how do we support pelvic health in our higher impact endurance runners so that we can support their pelvic health now and not only down the road? This study, as well as some of the others that have come out of the McLean lab, has really changed my mind and changed my practice. I used to try all of the conservative management stuff first, relating to muscular strengthening, pelvic floor coordination, ensuring that we have a good contract relax, and trying to strengthen the support beams, right, which is the butt muscles and all of our pelvic hip stabilizer deep muscles. Where I'm at in 2026 and what we teach in our pelvic live course that I teach in the Institute of Clinical Excellence is that we need to think about both. That there's going to be a subset of our population who it is their resting anatomy that is going to predispose them, and they can have the strongest pelvic floor, the most coordinated pelvic floor, and their butt muscles can be butts of steel, and they're still going to be experiencing these symptoms. And that is where pessary support is coming in. And the question that this group is now trying to figure out is, does it have to be like a fitted pessary, or can we use something space occupying like a tampon as a support? The next question that I think is going to be really interesting is, do we consider this as something preventative, right? Like, do we just kind of start advocating for our women using a tampon when they're running, for example, as an option, like prophylactic bracing or something related to their running career? I think it's such an interesting conversation. It's one that we need to be having, but it requires care. It requires nuance, and studies like this help to layer in our clinical understanding so that we can take the best care of our runners, whether they are never had kids, pregnancy, pregnant, postpartum, masters athletes, postmenopausal athletes, how we can best serve them. I hope you all found that helpful. I will put the link to the study in the caption. Let me know if you all have any questions, and we'll see you all next time.